Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here on our latest Restless Presents event this evening. We are really happy to have you all with us for this evening's event, which is all about how to help aging relatives to live well. I am delighted to introduce you to your host this evening, Amanda Jones, who is joining us from West Sussex. Amanda has more than 30 years of experience in working with older people, having worked for Age UK for many years, running day clubs for people with dementia, as well as the significant work that she's done with her church, which included running national conferences, residential and day events, all for older people. A year and a half ago, when Amanda was made redundant from her role at Age UK, even though it came out of the blue for her and was a really difficult time, Amanda used it as an opportunity to consider what she really wanted to do. So after some deliberation, she decided to retrain as a life coach, as it gave her the opportunity to work individually with people, which is something that she's always been passionate about. Alongside her consultancy, her life coaching consultancy, Amanda spends half her week working for a stroke club, which is working with people who have suffered from a stroke or other neurological condition. As someone in her late 50s herself, Amanda is a classic example of a sandwich generation, a position in which many of this evening's attendees might find themselves. Amanda has caring responsibilities for her elderly parents who are in their 90s, and she also has a 20-something-year-old son at home with her as well. Amanda is therefore passionate about being able to offer her advice and guidance to you this evening, which is based on her personal lived experience as well as her professional experience. So before I hand over to Amanda, I just wanted to make a little note on the technology side. First of all, if you're comfortable switching on your videos, please do. It's really nice to see your faces and to see our members all together. And it can also help the speaker feel a bit more comfortable. Amanda will have a few questions for you all throughout her presentation. Please use the chat box for your questions. At the end of the presentation, you'll have the opportunity to ask any questions, either through the chat box or by unmuting yourself, if you'd prefer. So if you've got any technical problems throughout the evening, please message us in the chat box as well, and my colleague Gaetano will be able to help you. And now, Amanda, over to you.
Well, good evening. How lovely to see everybody. I'm just going to pop my very first slide up, if I may. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so I don't know how familiar you are with the whole Zoom. You know, I've had to learn it, as a lot of people have over the last year. I don't think I'd ever heard of Zoom until last March. But there is a chat box. So if you do want to put anything in, that would be lovely for you to do so. I'm really interested to know what part of the country people are in, actually. So if you're able to pop into the chat bar where you're from, that would be great. As I say, I am from West Sussex. I live in a little village called Broadbridge Heath, which is between London and the South Coast, and I've lived here for the last 22 years. Is everyone okay? Is there a feedback on this? I noticed that someone in the chat bar had said that they felt there was a feedback, but hopefully we are all okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to whiz to my, here we go, supporting aging relatives. So that's what we're going to be looking at this evening. And it is a subject I am very passionate about. It's something that I have been involved with people for many years in doing, and I now find myself very much in that role myself, because I, as Ash says, have my parents are both in their 90s, so they have very much, although they are quite independent, they do very much on me a degree of support. So let me just, oh, where's that gone? There we go. Let me just, so what we're planning to cover this evening then are a few different things, which in some respects, each of these things is a 45-minute session in its own right. But I'm hoping that we'll be able to touch on and share some tips and some ideas that will hopefully add value to you coming and being with us this evening, so that you'll go away from here feeling, oh, actually, I have got a couple of ideas or thoughts that perhaps it's got me thinking in a different way than maybe I have done to date, which hopefully will be helpful for you. So that's what we're planning to cover, our well-being, which I always do at the very beginning of any talk that I give, because it is so key if we are supporting elderly relatives, that we are very much aware of what our own well-being needs are before we, think about anything else. Going to be looking at independence, difficult conversations that we may have to have with elderly relatives and how best to have them, failing health, things, talking about different care packages and how do you choose a care package, and etc., etc. And also, hopefully, there'll be time for looking at preparing for loss as well at the very end there. So if you have questions, please do put them into the chat box. I know Ash is going to keep an eye on those for me. And, as we, at the end of our talk, we'll hopefully have plenty of time to have a look at some of those with you, and I will help you where I possibly can. So, okay, let's go. So the first thing that I want to talk about, as I said, is our well-being. And in the work that I do, I'm very, very aware that quite often I find that people who are caring for or involved in supporting their elderly relatives can be quite poor at looking after their own well-being. It's a very, very common thing that I come across. So in an ideal world, of course we aren't in an ideal world, but in an ideal world, if I was to kind of have a cake and divide it into sections, ideally I'd want to kind of have it so that all the sections are reasonably equal. So for myself, I've got me there in the top left-hand corner. I've got my job, as I say, I work as a life coach, and also I work running a stroke club. I have my son, and also I have my elderly parents. So ideally, my time and my energy and my emotional resources and physical resources kind of go into them fairly equally. And that's what I would call the circle of perfect whelm. Everything's fairly equal and jogging along quite nicely. But of course, what can happen is we go into a situation whereby our aging relatives, their needs may change as they get older, or they have a significant situation that may occur in their lives. For example, they may have a stroke, or they may get a significant health diagnosis. It might just be that they are getting older. And what can happen is that I still need to spend the same amount of time on my job. And so that's kind of like a non-negotiable. I still have to work the same amount of hours. Children, or it could be anything in that particular segment. It might well be something different for you, grandchildren or whatever it may be, that's important to you. And then you have your relative, and as their needs change, what tends to happen is the part of the circle that changes is the me segment. And that tends to get squashed. So it becomes less and less and less. And sometimes I speak to people who say to me they feel as if they've almost lost themselves entirely. They almost don't recognize themselves anymore from the person they used to be a few years ago. And it's because actually they've allowed everything else around them that's important to them to kind of squeeze them into almost like almost not in the circle at all. And that's quite dangerous and really, really not terribly helpful. So why is well-being so important? Well, of course, if we think about when we're on an aircraft, or we all know that they go through the safety drill and they say, if the oxygen masks come down, make sure you put your own mask on first before you help somebody else. And or if you're on a boat, make sure you put your own life jacket on first before you're going to help someone else. And we kind of know it in theory that that's what we're meant to do. We're meant to look after ourselves to enable us to be in a much better place to then be able to look after those that we're trying to support. And we have to remind ourselves that of the importance of that it's not being selfish to take time out. It's really, really important that we recognize and we maintain space in our lives, in our diaries, to make sure that we are doing things that are actually going to keep us to stay well, both physically and mentally, if we're then going to be in the best place we can be to support our aging parents. As I say, I've looked on the Rest Less community pages, and I see there's a lot of stuff about well-being already out there, which I'm so thrilled to see. So I know I don't need to go into any great detail this evening around well-being, because there's already a huge amount of resources on the Restless site for you to have a look at. When I'm doing my talks around well-being, I use the 5 ways to well-being, which I guess a lot of you probably have heard of before. Unsurprisingly, there are 5 ways. And these are just kind of like almost, it's a bit of a checklist for us, I think, to see how we are doing with making sure that we're looking after ourselves. So the first one is around connecting with people. And that could be a whole range of different things. It's kind of like, who's our support network? When we are supporting our aging relatives, we ourselves need to know that we've got people around us that are there for us too. So it might be our other family members, partner, it might be our friends, perhaps our church, or another community of people that we have around us, that we connect with regularly, and that we are able to share with what's going on and be able to kind of talk things through with people and get their support. It might be connecting with other professional services, other organizations that are particularly dealing with maybe a particular health condition that perhaps your loved one may have, a stroke or Parkinson's or dementia or whatever it might be, that you're connected with people that are going to be able to support and help you. Staying physically active. Well, we all know, don't we, that it's so important that we stay physically active. I always have to kind of pull myself up a little bit with this one, because I'm not really the most physically active person that there is on the planet. I've got a very intimate relationship with my bed, but I know that in theory I really should be out there staying much more physically active. And we know that when we are active, how that releases our endorphins in our brain, and really does help us to be able to function from a much better place when we're supporting other people. So staying physically active, very important. Learning new skills. Well, I don't know about you, over lockdown, I mean, I've had to work from home, which I've never done before. And so I've had to learn a lot of technical skills and I'm still not brilliant at them, but I'm a lot better than I was this time last year. Learning new skills can be anything. It might be learning to play a new sport, have a go at learning a new game, joining a club, just doing things that are going to get our brain active and get ourselves going. All of these things so important to our own well-being. Giving to others. Well, if you're caring for, supporting relatives, you're already giving to others, aren't you? But actually giving to others in the sense of, even if it's just a smile to someone when you go to the shop, or asking the cashier how their day's going. We know that when we give of ourselves out, actually that releases the endorphins in our brain and makes us actually feel better. So the return that we get for giving to others is very beneficial for us. And then finally we have the mindfulness, and again that might be something like you might choose to do yoga, or you might choose to just be reading a particular mindfulness type book, but it's also about being mindful of our environment and taking notice of what's actually happening around us. You know, that whole thing of wake up and smell the roses, that idea of not rushing through our days so much that we don't actually notice, springtime, oh dear, I don't know why it's gone to that particular slide. I apologize. Let me go back. Just being able to kind of connect with what's around us and enjoy what's around us is so important. So that's kind of well-being. I just wanted to do that at the start of what we're going to talk about. I'm going to come off my slides now for a little while so that I can see you all. And gosh, there's a lot of you. How encouraging, how lovely to see everybody. And what I want to us to think about next is the around the whole area of independence. And this is something that I think has two main drivers as to how this can work very successfully or not. And I think if we've got relatives who are in reasonably good health, and they've also got a positive attitude, one or the other or both, then you are in a significantly better position than if they've got failing health or if they've not got a particularly positive attitude. And let's face it, everybody's different, everyone's unique. So when you're thinking of your own relatives, you'll kind of already be able to kind of be thinking, oh yeah, I know where they fall. Because I think with independence, what is so important for us as people who are wanting to support our older relatives as their independence changes is that we have to also check our own attitude and the reasons why we might be trying to do the things we are doing or implementing the things that we think may be helping them, and really kind of have a little pause and allow ourselves to really think whether that is what's happening. I have a lovely story to share with you of a gentleman who a number of years ago, it was quite some time ago now, I was running conferences for people who were coming up to retirement or newly retired. And I was speaking at a conference. There was about 150 people there. And they were all around the age 55 to 75, actually. So quite a big age range. That's almost 2 generations, isn't it? And I had recently been volunteering in China, doing some volunteer work over in China. And I came back, was speaking at this conference and telling them about what I'd been doing. And came away, the conference finished, I came away, came home, and a few weeks later I got a letter from a gentleman who was in his early 70s, and he was a Chelsea pensioner, and he'd been at the conference, and he said that he had been very inspired by what I had shared with them, to the point that he actually went back and decided that although he was very proud of being a Chelsea pensioner, he was still very fit and independent, and he decided that perhaps he'd kind of put himself into the box of being towards, not doing so much anymore a little bit too early. And in fact, what he did was he signed up to go and do what I'd done, and he went out there for a month, as I had. And then I had another letter from him to say, in fact, he'd enjoyed it so much that he had decided to go and spend 18 months out there. So he learned Mandarin, he moved out there for 18 months, and he helped do voluntary work in an orphanage out there, and then came back a couple of years later, went back into being the Chelsea pensioners home there in London. And he had realized that actually he had kind of almost allowed himself to, he had kind of started to think of himself as not able to do anything else a little bit too early. And he was, as I say, had 2 more years where he did something completely amazing, and it really inspired him, and he enjoyed that. And I think one of the things that I'm very aware of, that depending on our type of personality and depending on our relative's personality, is kind of how we navigate through this whole area of independence. And one of the things that I've trained to do over the last 6 months is to do personality profiling. And one of the things that gives you is an opportunity to find out what makes you the kind of person that you are, your base level reactions, how you tend to react in a certain situation, and also how people around you may react as well. And when you've got that information, it's not so that it can be a label, it's so that you can then use that information to your advantage. So for example, if you know that you're someone who is very impulsive and makes decisions very quickly, and is quite good at influencing the situation around to where you want it to go. If you're working with someone who is very steady and sensitive and very much status quo, the danger can be that if you're trying to make a decision around your elderly relative's care, and you've got someone who is in a different place than you and has a different personality to you, that's when clashes can happen and disagreements. And you can kind of, you hear sometimes, don't you, with siblings, that they disagree about what should be happening for mum, and all sorts of things can kick off. So I think being aware of the kind of personality that you are, and being aware of the kind of personality that perhaps you might be making decisions with, and also your relative as well, can really help you to kind of navigate through decisions, being very mindful of not everyone's going to see where you're coming from straight away. And actually, often there's compromises that are needed. And so just being mindful of that can be very, very helpful. I think I had a client not that long ago, actually, who came to me, and she has an elderly father who had up until quite recently been going and doing his own shopping each week in Tesco's. And then came the point where he wasn't driving anymore. And so she took over the doing the shopping. She said, well, don't worry, Dad, I can do that for you. And when I was talking to her, she said, one of the things that she had noticed was actually their relationship wasn't as good as it had been, and also that her dad was kind of deteriorating. He was kind of becoming much more insular, less engaged, and she was, quite concerned about that. And so we had a chat, and I asked her why she had decided that it was a good idea for her to take over doing the shopping each week. And she said, oh, well, I really want to help him, and I want to show him that I'm there for him. I want to show him that I'm able to do these things. He doesn't need to worry. And also I'm a lot quicker than he is as well. And so we talked about that a little bit more and realized that actually what she'd done was, with the best will in the world and with the best heart, because she's quite a nurturer, she's someone who I would still kind of quite a nurturing person, had unwittingly taken away her dad's independence with regard to his shopping. So although he wasn't able to drive and do the shopping anymore, there wasn't actually any reason why he couldn't do the shopping. He just physically couldn't get there. So she changed her way of doing it, and now twice a month she takes him with her. Very, very simple thing, really. You know, this is not rocket science, but sometimes we make decisions, or we start to go down a certain path without perhaps thinking that bigger picture of what effect our decisions that we're making, thinking that they're good decisions, may actually have. And in fact, what then happened was he was able to go back into Tesco's fortnightly. He gets, you know, he's able to treat himself with things that he sees as he's going round, rather than just having to stick to the list. And, you know, he has a chat with the lady at the till, and, you know, he really has now re-engaged with an activity that he's perfectly capable of doing. He just needed some support, but he didn't need the whole action, the whole activity to be taken from him. You know, that wasn't an appropriate intervention, if you like, at this point for him. It wasn't the most helpful thing. And so I think that what I'm trying to get at here is it's so important that we really are mindful about what we're saying, when we're saying it, how we're saying it, and thinking about what that bigger picture is. What is it that we want the outcome of conversations that we're having with our aging relatives to be? And if we can focus on that outcome, then hopefully that will help us to navigate to get there. I want to talk about the area of tricky conversations. I don't know if you've had a tricky conversation with your elderly relative. One of the ones that comes up quite often is around, and I'm going to use it as the example, although there are many different tricky conversations that I could refer to that we have to navigate through. I'm sure you could come up with some corkers. But the one I'm going to use is around the topic of giving up driving. Anyone had that conversation with anyone before? And how we can navigate our way successfully through that without making the person that we're talking to feel as if we're taking their independence away. And as I say, my parents are in their 90s. My mum's never driven, so I haven't had to have that conversation with her. And my dad drove until he was well into his 80s, actually. He's 96 next month. And I think, so one of the things we need to be aware of is that actually at the age of 70 in the UK is when you have to apply to renew your license. So if you've got relatives that are of that age, they will be getting something through to say you need to reapply. But obviously people drive a lot later than 70, don't they? And you know, to be fair, there's no reason why not. If they're in reasonable, you know, they're okay to drive. That's great. You know, we want to keep people integrated into society and able to do the things they love to do. There has to be a reason why we would want someone to give up their driving license. And so one of the things that I would say is it's really important to think about the outcome of what you want that conversation to be, which is usually that you would like them to be to stop driving. So then we need to think about a couple of things. We need to think about what it is that we need to say. What is it you're actually needing to say to them? when is the best time to say it? So remembering that you want the right outcome. So no good saying it to them if they're not in a very good place that day when you thought you were going to talk to them about it, or you will know what the best time of day is to talk to your relatives. They may be morning people, they may be better in the afternoon. It may be better if you take them out for a cup of tea, obviously COVID allowing. Maybe they're better at weekends or whatever. You know your relatives, and use that to your advantage. So when you're thinking about when you're going to have these conversations, make sure you do it at a time when you are feeling calm, and so and not kind of all kind of like agitated, and at a time when they are more likely to be receptive to what it is you're going to say. So there are some ideas here that you could try out. I'm not saying they're foolproof or that I can't guarantee that they will work, but I know people that have used these kind of things. So like, rather than just going in for the kill, Dad, are you, when are you thinking about giving up driving? That's probably not the best way to approach it. It might be something more like, oh, Dad, when's your car MOT due? Is that when's that due? Or the service. When do you need to get your car serviced? Oh, is the car tax coming up soon for your car? And kind of just bring it in that way. Oh, okay. How are you feeling about that? Do you think your car's going to pass its MOT this time? Have you got any concerns, or do you think it's going to be expensive to get it serviced? Just generally bringing in a car into a conversation, but not directly going full out with, should you be driving? And then see what the answers are. See if you can get into a conversation around that, but in a completely non-threatening way. And then you could, maybe say, oh, have you had any thoughts about how much longer you're going to keep the car? Not how much longer are you going to stay driving? How much longer do you think you're going to keep the car for? And then, so what are your plans after that? What do you think will happen then? And then you might be able to say, what's your, again, not coming in for the kill with, do you think you should be driving? But kind of like, maybe another question around, how do you think you're going to feel when you're not able to drive anymore? Get them to talk around perhaps that, rather than, again, this, I don't think you should be driving, or when are you going to give up driving? There's a lot of ways that you can introduce the subject in a very kind of chatty type way. And I know some of you are thinking, you don't know my relatives, and I don't, and I respect that. And I know that, not everybody is going to play ball, because we're all humans, aren't we? So there are a few ideas of, and if you find that they're saying, well, actually, I don't want to give up driving, oh, well, it's not the right time for me yet, sort of, I'm going to carry on driving at the moment. One of the questions that you could ask is, so how will you know when it's the right time for you to give up? What needs to happen for you to know that it's the right time? And again, if we say it, again, we have to be so careful about how we're saying these things, so that, we're trying to keep it light. We're not trying to kind of like pressure them or put them in a corner, because this is something really valuable for people, isn't it? And kind of like, and when we're asking, well, how will life be different for you afterwards, after you stop driving? And what are the things that you want to put into place that maybe I can help you with, or encourage them to do themselves if they can, that will help you to live without being a car driver? Give them that kind of like, independence as much as you possibly can, rather than making decisions for them and say, as I say, this lady that I talked with, well, I'll do all your shopping for you, or I'll do all of that. And it kind of like, actually, one of the things they may be thinking about, is, well, actually, if I'm not going to Tesco's once a week, I won't even get to see a change of scenery or chat to the checkout girl that I've been talking to for the last 10 years or whatever that might be. So those transitions that we talk about with that we go through are, you know, let's make them as smooth as we possibly can. The other thing that I just want to move into is around our changing health and care packages and that kind of thing. So again, it's something I could speak for 45 minutes on its own, as I could with all of these things. I'm really just touching the surface here. I always like to use the term helping people to live well with whatever the diagnosis is that they've got, rather than someone is suffering from dementia or they're suffering from, undoubtedly, I'm not belittling the huge impact that these things have on people's lives. I'm not trying to suggest that it's easy. It absolutely isn't. And in my line of work, I've observed and worked with some very traumatic situations. But equally so, I try where I can to encourage people to think about how we can make people's lives, how we can help them to live well with whatever it is that they are contending with. And when I say they are contending, of course, I kind of, it's a we are all contending with. You know, if you've got a family member with dementia, that affects every single member of your family. It's not just them that's contending with whatever it might be. So the key is choosing what's right for you, and what's right for you may be different, and almost certainly will be different than somebody else. You know, I always say when I worked, I used to set up and run or manage clubs for people with dementia, and I would always say, if you've met one person with dementia, you've met one person with dementia. When you meet the next person with dementia, they may seem as if they've got similarities, but actually they're completely unique, because each and every single person is completely unique. And we need to remember that when we are connecting with and supporting our aging relatives, if they've got a particular health need that we are trying to support them in. I think it's really important, from my observation and from the work that I've done and the people that I work with, that you have as many open conversations as you possibly can, as early as you can. Unfortunately, burying our heads in the sand until the crisis hits or gets a lot worse is never, ever a good idea. And so if you are, as I spoke about earlier when we were talking about well-being and that connections and who you've got around you, if you've got siblings or other people that are involved in, you know, an aging relative's care, then really important that you have conversations as early as you possibly can, so that that dialogue's begun. Now, I know that not everybody is an open book, and not everyone's very comfortable about talking about care and end of life and all of that. I realise that for some people, it's almost a no-go area, and it's very hard to break through. One of the things that I do with my coaching is to work with people who find that they just don't know how to begin on this, because it's something that they personally have a bit of a barrier themselves in being able to sort of think about end of life and all that kind of thing, and changing health and care packages. It's just a complete overwhelm to them. So I always say to people, you know, try to get those conversations going early. Don't put them off and think, I can't do it, so I'll just do it another time, because it's not going to get any easier. It will only get more difficult. I think one of the things very important to say, I mean, it's kind of obvious, but I've coached people and spoken to people that have not done this, and it's been a really difficult thing for them afterwards to later on for them to come to terms with, is don't make promises that you can't keep. You know, don't say to someone, I promise you, you will never end up in hospital, or I promise you, you will never end up here, there, or everywhere, anywhere. Far better to say, I will do my absolute best to try to allow you to be where you want to be and to have the kind of care that you're telling me you want to have. I will do my absolute best to try to make that happen. If you start making promises, things happen that are outside our control. Not everything's in our control. And if you have promised someone, for example, I'll never let them take you into hospital, and then something happens and they end up in hospital, and it's been outside your control, you know, heaven forbid then that you're in a situation where they, you know, pass away in that time. And then you've got that guilt of, the thing I promised them I would never do has happened, and now I've got this stack of guilt around that I've got to do something with. So be kind to yourself, be careful with yourself. You know, this is all part of your own well-being as well, about kind of thinking about the kind of things you're going to say and when you're going to say it, how you're going to say it, so that it helps the person you're helping, but also doesn't put you into a position where, you know, you're going to struggle later on potentially. Finding out things and having conversations around things like DNR, do not resuscitate forms. You know, what is your loved one's wish on that? It might be very different than what you want. You might want to keep them alive as long as possible at all costs. That might not be what your elderly relative is wanting for themselves. They might not want medical intervention. Far better to have that conversation with them before you hit a crisis. And I'm living this myself. My parents, I mean, they've got into their mid-90s and they've only now just decided that they want to sign a DNR form, which they did a couple of weeks ago. We got one from the surgery and now we've got that in place. Up until that point, they said, no, if I have, you know, I would like medical intervention, but they've now decided that actually that's not what they want anymore. And, you know, I know exactly where the forms are and all the rest of it. So having those conversations, I know for me, being able to have those conversations with my parents has been really, really helpful to me as I begin to move into the stage for myself where I'm preparing for the fact that at 96 and 94, they're quite possibly not going to be with me, maybe, you know, for very much longer. I just don't know. My dad's actually on palliative care now, so I doubt that he will be with me much longer. And I'm having to kind of, all the things that I'm sharing and all the things that I've kind of been talking about over the last however long I've been running these talks, is now something I'm very much living through. It's very, very personal to me. And care packages, just want to very briefly touch on that. So we've got, you know, there are a number of different ways of supporting aging parents, lots of different care packages out there. And to the point that people say, well, I really kind of just don't know what's the right one. How will I know what's the right one? And the advice that I always say to people with that is, it's very expensive to have care. If you've got anybody in care, you will know that. And if you're looking into it, you will know that. And so quite important, I think, that you spend some time. So ahead of the crisis, again, this is something, try to be thinking of these things before you hit crisis, because you don't want to be having to make these decisions when you're in a crisis situation, if you can possibly avoid it. Sometimes you can't, but if you can, better to think ahead and have an idea of what everybody in the family is thinking, and particularly what the person that's actually going to be having care wants. And so, you know, I've just made a couple of notes here of some of the different care scenarios that there are. There's obviously day clubs available, giving you respite care, or whoever's looking after them, if they're living at home, living with you, some days off. You can put them into residential respite as well. And then also there's the whole thing of whether you get like perhaps a daily carer coming in, helping them get up, get dressed, maybe coming in and cooking the midday meal, putting them to bed at night. Maybe it reaches a point where perhaps you need to make a decision as to whether or not they have a living carer, or at that point whether it's the appropriate thing to perhaps move them into a residential care setting, and if so, what kind of residential care? Because there's a wealth of different residential care settings out there, you know, a whole range, including nursing care as well, if that's required. I always, one of the things that I do with people that I work with, I get them to write down what their list of essentials are. So I say to people, rather than think, okay, I've got to make the decision about they've got to go into care or whatever it is, think about, what do I want to happen, what the outcome is going to be as a result of putting mum or dad or whatever into residential care, for example. Let's just take that as an example. What is it that I actually want their life to look like 3 months down the road? And what do I want my life to look like 3 months down the road? Not immediately they've gone in, but kind of like after everybody's settled down, what do you actually want to your life to be looking like? Because that can really help contribute towards the kind of decision you make around where they go and what they do and how that's going to fit in. You know, for example, if you're actually wanting to move mum down from another part of the country so that they can live near you, and you're going to put them into a residential setting at the end of your road, that might sound wonderful and might be fantastic, and it might work brilliantly. But if actually you work full time and you've got 3 or 4 other things that occupy an awful lot of your time, actually what can happen is mum moves into that home. You actually don't get to spend an awful lot of time with her because you're so busy doing everything else. And in fact, they're more isolated than ever because they've not got any of the support network that they had where they lived before. So all of these things are things that I suggest are really important for you to be kind of thinking about. And so I always encourage people, think 3 months ahead. What is it that you would like, you know, your life to be looking like and their life to be looking like? And that will really help you to make these decisions. And one thing I will just say, if I may, when if you are ever in a position of looking at homes or residential settings or anything like that, I'm just going to put this out there. The key is not how swanky it looks, you know, it's the staff. And of course, one of the things with staff is that there is a turnover of staff. So, but that's the key. If anyone ever says to me, what's the most important thing about when I'm looking at a care home, I say it's the staff. Talk to the staff, get a feeling for whether they like working there, how long they've worked there, what they like about working there. Talk to the staff and you'll get an idea about, you know, a much better idea of things than just looking to see whether it's got the, you know, some of these care homes now are absolutely, they're like 5-star hotels, quite frankly. But it's so important that you've got good staff. And I realise that I'm really running, you know, sort of, I've already gone over 45 minutes and I know that you may have some questions. So I'm just going to very, very quickly say about living with loss, because that was my final point. And there are some amazing organisations out there that you can tap into and who can support you. Bereavement and counsellors and life coaches do a lot of work with people that are preparing for loss or living with loss. I have clients that I speak to that are just looking around what my life is going to look like now I've lost this important person in my life. Grief takes many forms. There's no handbook for how it should look. There's various stages of grief and you can kind of go from one back to another and whatever. But you know, there is a lot of support out there. And so please, you know, if you find yourself in a situation where, especially after a few months, you're just feeling really still stuck in a place of not being able to move on, please do, you know, do seek some help, you know, in whatever way it may be, you know, from a counsellor, from a bereavement organisation, from a life coach, whoever, and, you know, do get some professional help to help you. I'm going to just put my, let's go back to that one. Ooh, and just go on to the next slide. I think should go on to the next slide, hopefully. Oh dear, what happened there? Ooh, can I get it back?
Just go one back.
I've got a blank screen here. Oh, here we go. Oh dear. Sorry, guys. Let's try again, shall we? Share screen. And here is my details, which I just wanted to give you. You'll see that I've got a number of different things, ways that you can connect with me. I've got a Facebook page. I've got my website. I'm happy for you to email me, and I'm also happy for you to telephone me. So even if it's just to visit any of those things, pages, that would be great. Please do feel free to do that. I've kind of come to the end of what I want to say. I'm wanting to see, have we got any questions there that have come up in the chat, Ash?
No questions that have come up in the chat, but please do feel free, if you'd like to ask a question, to either pop it in the chat box, or if you want to use, if you can see the reactions button at the bottom of your screen, if you click on that, you can raise your hand and we can unmute you if you'd like to ask Amanda a question that way instead. Everyone's being quite quiet. I think.
Oh, I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. I stunned them into silence.
I'm just going to wait to see if anybody's been typing. I'll give it another couple of minutes. I don't think so, Amanda. I think that's... Oh, okay. Someone has popped a question in. Thank you, Karen. Advice on power of attorney. Amanda, do you have any good resources that you can direct people to?
So what I would say on that, I don't do any legal stuff at all. I'm not insured to give any advice, so I won't. But what I can say is that Age UK are extremely knowledgeable about such things, and they have departments which deal solely with this. And so if you contact your local Age UK, then they will be able to help you. And it is something that is so important that you, there are two types of power of attorney, one's regarding sort of financial decisions, and one around health decisions, and definitely something that I would strongly advise that you get information on. Again, it's, as I said earlier, really, it's about getting as prepared as you can ahead of the game, because when you're having to do things in a crisis situation, that's when things can go, can be much more difficult, and perhaps, you know, decisions get rushed, or and so where possible, always try to think ahead.
Amanda, just a question from me, actually, based on that and what you said earlier about tricky conversations. Do you have a checklist of sorts where to preempt those tricky conversations for some people, where they might not have come across some of these things until the crisis is in full flow?
I don't have a checklist as such. I mean, I know that there are a number of different issues that, you know, that kind of come up quite often. I mean, the driving is probably one. Moving downsizing, when someone's been living in a particular place for a long time, and when is the right decision for them to downsize? When is the right, is it the right decision? And I touched on this earlier about moving a relative that lives away nearer to you. All of those kind of things are things that can be tricky conversations. One of the tricky conversations actually sometimes comes the other way round, where there is an assumption on the relative's part that when the time comes that they need it, that they are going to come and live with you. And I've had that come up as well, where there was just this assumption by one of the lady that I was talking to, her husband's mother, just had made this assumption that when the time was right, she would be able to go and live with them. And of course, it came at a time when, as often these things do, when you referred to the sandwich generation, which of course 55s to 65s, we're kind of in. We've got so much going on. We've got our own jobs. We're perhaps thinking about whether we're going to change our job one more time before we retire. We might have our children leaving home, so we've got that empty nest. We've got a lot of things going on in our lives, and then add to that we suddenly find ourselves in a situation where we've got elderly relatives that need additional support, and it's really full on, and you can be pulled this way, that way, and every way but loose. So again, trying to preempt some of these situations, if there's any hint of, if you've got, mum-in-law, and you're kind of thinking, wonder what her thoughts are as she gets more frail, and perhaps having that conversation with your spouse or partner. What are your thoughts? What are you thinking? Or what are your expectations? And it's amazing what people don't talk about and it's amazing that you find yourselves in these conversations with people, and they find themselves in their conversations with their relatives or whatever, and people have made great assumptions of things of, well, I thought they were going to go and live with you, or I thought they were going to go and live with you, or whatever. And so
thank you, Amanda. That's it for the questions. So I appreciate it's a really personal topic, so it might be that people want to contact you separately and privately, and that's completely fine. And
yeah, please, if anyone's got anything that they would like to talk to me privately about, I'm very happy to do so. Just have a conversation with you. I always, I'm very happy to chat for up to half an hour with people just about any particular situation, without any charge whatsoever, just to kind of help people out. So please do get in contact with me if you would like to. I'd love to hear from some of you.
Thank you, Amanda. We will be putting this video on our YouTube channel. So if you haven't jotted down Amanda's details from that final slide, you'll be able to access it that way over the next couple of days. And we can also send a follow-up in our follow-up email to you all tomorrow to thank you for attending. And that's it from us. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you find it useful. Please do provide feedback when you're asked for it tomorrow, because it's always so valuable to us, and we're using it to shape the types of talks that our members are giving to each other. Thank you all. Have a lovely rest of your evenings. Thank you, Amanda.
Bye-bye now. Lovely to see you all.
Bye.